Good evening. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Parent Pit Stop. I'm glad that you're all popping in. Hello, hello, hello. As always, we're going to jump right in. But before we get started, if you're here, please sign into the comment, give me a hi or your name, tag a friend so that we can get you down for attendance. That would be great. It's hard to believe that a week has passed by and already we're at our third session of the Parent Pit Stop. I'm pretty excited. Hi, Ashley. Welcome. If everybody else could just sign in, give me a hi. We're taking attendance by who we see comment, so that would be very helpful. So I'm going to give it just a few more minutes, and then we're going to go ahead and get started. This is one of my favorite activities that we're going to do, and I really do love the topic tonight. So tonight's topic is, do you have a parenting plan? And that's important because when you stop and think about it, we plan just about everything else in our life. Vacations, we plan where we're going, how much money we need to take. Are we flying? Are we driving? Where are we going to eat? Where are we going to stay? There's a whole thought out process when we plan a vacation. When we are thinking about our career and what direction we'd like to go, and we think about the steps we need to take to get there, that's a plan as well. So, right down to weekends. On Monday, I know what I'm doing the following weekend. There's lots of planning going on in our lives, but oftentimes we don't really sit down and formulate a plan, a direction that we're headed when it comes to parenting, because we get so caught up in the day-to-day with all the stressors. The last 6 months, I don't need to tell you about the stressors we've been experiencing there. Hi, Rosie. And just trying to get through the day, get people where they need to go, get to work, get the kids to Head Start or school or whatever the case might be, getting off of work, coming home, making dinner, getting everybody to bed. It's just a repetitive cycle that we go through day to day. But it's really important to really take a step back, take a deep breath, take a deep breath and relax that we learned last week, and think about the direction that you're headed and what it is that you want to accomplish in parenting and where you would like to hopefully end up. Now, keep in mind there's lots of factors that can kind of interfere with those things, but we're just going to get a plan in place that gives you kind of a direction once the plan is in place, how to approach day-to-day parenting in the decisions you make and how you address the things. And again, how you reframe the way you see parenting now maybe as opposed to before. So I'm going to start with this exercise that I've done several times, and it's worked like a charm, so I'm hoping that it's going to work tonight. And in the comment, last week we talked about that whole prefrontal lobe and the fact that this part of the brain is not fully developed until people are about the age of 26. And so this is where, of course, all decision making, problem solving, good decisions, calm, that all comes from that part of the brain. So keep in mind that until your child is 26, that part of the brain is going to continue to be developing. And so there's going to be some, setbacks here and there. You're going to think they've mastered something and maybe they'll slip back a little bit. So it's a work in progress until your child is in 26. But think about your child at age 26 and think about some of the values or characteristics or, what you want to see hopefully in their life when they're 26 years of age. And if you could, just pop some things in that come to mind in the comments. And while you're doing that, I'll give you an example. One thing that's really important to me is integrity. When I think of my kids as adults, I want them to have integrity. I want them to, their word is golden, so to speak. They're going to follow through with what they say, that there's integrity in their actions. So that would be one example of where at 26 I would like to see my children having that value. And again, if you can pop in some thoughts in the comment section of where you'd like to see or what values you would like to see, your children have, because this is where the plan really starts. The plan starts with thinking where you want to end up and working your way backwards. Because once you decide where you want to end up, it can then determine how you handle day-to-day situations, developmental phases that kids go through, like the tantruming that we talked about last week. So this is the start of the plan. The start of the plan is over the course of the next week or so, make that list of, where do we want to end up from here? Because again, it's so easy to get caught up in the day-to-day that we lose sight of where we're going. And here's the thing. What we're doing right now is we are creating adults. That's what our role as a parent is, to prepare our child or children for life. And everything that we are teaching them should revolve around that. So Ashley said kindness and patience. Those are two very good ones. So we have integrity, kindness, and patience. Again, for those of you just joining, we're putting in the comments some values or characteristics that we would like to see our children possess when they're about 26 years of age. So that's really, those are really important things as well. Honesty, another good one. I love honesty. Honesty is a good one. So these are, again, things that we are hoping that our child, when we get them to that wonderful age of 26, characteristics that they will possess. So here's the thing about the list, because we could do this for 15 minutes, but then our time would be up. If you make your list and you really look at your list, and you go back and look at all of those characteristics that are there, one of the things that you're probably going to find, because this is what I have found, oh, look at Rosie's list: honesty, integrity, self-confidence, independence while knowing what it is they want in life, acceptance of where people are, and no judging. That's a mouthful, Rosie, but those are all great. So let's just take all the ones that we just talked about. The interesting thing, when you finish your list, most of the time that I do this with parents, when they look back on their list, the things that they really want to see for their kids at 26 require no formal education. Now, I don't want anybody to hear me say that your kids shouldn't go to college. That's not what I'm saying. But when parents typically make these lists and really take a look at it, one of the things that might be on the list is college education, good job. Those things require schooling or some specialized training, but almost everything else on that list is something that does not require formal education. But we spend so much time focused on that. And we don't oftentimes focus on those characteristics that we want to develop while our children are small, starting from then and continuing to be consistent in that, so that it increases the chance of them ending up with those types of characteristics. So the reason I love this exercise is because it proves the point and reinforces to me that the past couple of weeks I've mentioned conscious discipline, and one of the things that I mentioned is that there's a social and emotional focus. Those qualities that are listed in those comments and that we've been talking about are all based from social and emotional development and intelligence. So though that says to us, that's a huge area that we need to pay attention to. And to further kind of make my case for that, one of the reasons that we in Head Start switched over to conscious discipline way back when is because we did a lot of conversing with kindergarten teachers that were going to be receiving our kids from Head Start. And we asked them, what is it that you're looking for in kids when they come to kindergarten? And almost all of the kindergarten teachers that we talked to said this: if we can have a child come into a room who can sit at circle time, attend to a task, be kind to their friends, have learned how to share and be empathetic to other children, we can teach them everything that they need to know. So all of those are social and emotionally developed kind of characteristics. So that's important to know, because while I can tell you that, our kids leave Head Start school ready in regard to ABCs and 1, 2, 3s, what our kids from Head Start also leave with is the ability to do all those things that teachers are looking for. And we've gotten feedback from parents in the past that when it comes time for that first parent-teacher conference, and when their child is in kindergarten, teachers have actually said, where was it your child came from again? Because they are so great in making friends and being compassionate to other kids and being able to settle into a classroom. So those are things that are equally important to the educational piece, but it's oftentimes something that once our kids become school age, we get very focused on, did they behave in school today? What are you learning? And those kind of things. But the other thing is, all of those types of skills are things that we can be reinforcing at home. And if you have siblings in the house, you have a perfect situation to develop all of those kind of things. So you can teach things like taking turns, sharing, being empathetic and compassionate to each other. Next week, we're going to do some stuff on self-esteem in children, and also some positive approaches to getting where you want to go, while you reframe and lose the term punishment. So here's the thing about punishment and discipline. For a long time, those words were interchangeable when it came to parenting curriculums. People use the words interchangeably. You need to discipline that child, or he needs to be punished. So punishment is a word we're going to put over here for right now. Discipline is the word that we're going to reframe how we think of discipline. And discipline, like I said, for a very long time was associated with punishment. If you were disciplining a child, you were punishing a child. Discipline is really about teaching discipline. What we're trying to do in developing a child's social and emotional competency and intelligence is to teach them how to be self-disciplined. That's what we're trying to teach, because guess what? That's the life skill that they need forever. That's a skill we all need. We need to know how to regulate our behavior and regulate our emotions from within, and not because someone's making us do that. So that's a real shift from old school parenting, because I came from a home where we were ruled by the iron hand. And it's interesting, I found something on the Conscious Discipline website that rang true for me. So I'm just going to read that to you. It's the difference between punishments and consequences. And later on, we're going to talk about, not later on tonight, but later on, we're going to talk about consequences and how to set consequences up, and to understand that there are consequences for every decision we make. When we make good decisions, there's a good consequence. And when we make bad decisions, there might be a bad consequence. So consequences also is another one of those words that people have used in the past to mean something bad. But what we're trying to teach our children in developing their social and emotional intelligence and those life skills that they need is that there's a consequence for every behavior, good and bad. And that's part of how kids learn as they go along to make those decisions. Because if they want a good consequence, then again, we're backtracking just like we are with our plan. This is what we want to see, so here's how we're going to parent to get to that. It's the same thing that we're trying to instill in kids over time, that you choose a consequence or how you want the consequence to be, and therefore that dictates which choice you need to make. But let me show you the difference between punishments and consequences according to Conscious Discipline. So punishments make children suffer for having a problem. So that might be the behavior that we're talking about. Consequences, teach children how to solve problems. Punishments cause children to fear making mistakes. Consequences, show children that mistakes are opportunities to learn. So I'm just going to stop on this one because this is a huge one for kids that are young, especially. We talked a little bit to this point about how we react to things, and how we react sometimes can make a child feel like it's not okay to make a mistake. What we need to instill in our kids is that everybody makes mistakes, and that's all a learning process. Again, it's teaching, teaching, teaching. That's what we're doing. I mentioned last week that, or the week before, it seems like you're repeating yourself all the time. That's how kids learn. Again, a lot of this is going to be a lot of repetition for kids to develop those life skills that they need to operate in the world in an appropriate way, or a way that works for them. So there's that. We need to instill in our kids that mistakes are okay. Everybody makes mistakes, and then learn from those mistakes, helping our children learn from those mistakes. And one of the things that we shift to, again, reframing, is misbehavior to mistaken behavior. So the mistaken behavior can be corrected. When we are framing things as misbehavior, a lot of times we're in that negative frame all the time, and that's where you get into those power struggles and that constant craziness. Punishments rely on judgment on our part, and consequences rely on reflection and personal responsibility. So again, personal responsibility, that's something that 9 times out of 10 is on a list that a parent makes. I want my children to be accountable for their actions, or responsible for themselves. And that's where that all comes in. Punishments provide extrinsic motivation to please others and avoid physical and emotional pain, and consequences provide intrinsic motivation to use or learn new skills. So again, old school, punishment was, what is it that we're going to do to the child to get them to whatever? And now we're in a period, based on everything that we know, that we're not looking to do something to a child. We're looking at how we're going to resolve something with the child to develop skill. So there's a huge difference in those two things. And punishments focus on what not to do, and consequences focus on what to do instead. So a lot of times when parents get real caught up in the punishment aspect of things, we don't teach more appropriate behavior, or be a different choice that a child can make. So it was kind of like when we talked about a child being angry, and we talked about it's not okay to hit your brother, it's not okay to do this, but what can you do instead? There's a problem-solving step involved in that, and that's where that whole shift comes in how we approach things and how we look at things. So again, putting down that punishment word and not being punishment geared, because again, in conscious discipline, it's based on the relationships that you develop with your children or your child and within your family, and the connections there, and that's the foundation of where all of those steps we take to develop skill come from. So according to experts, there are, ironically, kind of tying in with the exercise that we just did, there are 8 things based on research that kids need to grow into happy, successful adults. So I'm going to read you these 8 things, and then you see if you can determine what's missing on this list. The first one is security. Second one is stability. Third, consistency. 4, emotional support. 5, love. 6, education. 7, positive role models. And 8, structure. So some of this we've talked about. Routine and structure we talked about being super important. But the one thing that's missing on this list Anybody not hear a word? The word you didn't hear was discipline. Now that's not to say that we don't need to teach children to be self-disciplined. It just means that those 8 things are of primary importance, and things that often we overlook, 1 or 2. So security is this: kids have to feel safe and sound. This means providing them with basic survival needs: shelter, food, clothing, medical care, protection from harm. Next one, stability. Stability comes from family and community. Ideally, a family remains together in a stable household, but when the ideal breaks down, your child's life must be as little disrupted as possible. So that's really important, because what that's saying to us is, we've just been through the last 6 months of things kind of breaking down. So, that's an example. Divorce would be an example. And that's really about minimizing the impact on the child as much as possible, to make things as consistent still and stable for the child, because that's how children would, continue to be okay. And I think we mentioned a couple weeks ago that, if kids see that you're okay, then they can feel a sense of being okay. So let's see. Kids and families should also be part of larger units to give them a sense of belonging and cultural continuity. Consistency. Parents must synchronize their parenting. No good cop, bad cop. We've talked about this already. So this is that situation where you're not going to be pitting each other, one against the other, not disagreeing in front of the kids, really making sure that you make that time to make sure that you're on the same page. Consistency also means that important values should not be changed casually or for convenience. So again, kids can count on things being the same from one day to the next. Now, keep in mind, there's always got to be flexibility, but for the most part, we're looking for children to be able to count on that consistency, count on that structure, that routine, kind of being the same from day to day, even if there is a little flexibility. Emotional support. Parents' words and actions should facilitate kids' trust, respect, self-esteem, there's that self-esteem word, and ultimately independence. So your entire job as a parent is to teach your kids life skills and to be ready to let them go, pretty much is what that says. And that can be pretty difficult, and I'm speaking as a mother of 4 adult children. But that's when your job is done, and you've given it your old college try. So just really continuing to, while your kids are growing up, really stay focused on the elements that we're talking about today, staying focused on your plan, where you want to end up, and then that determines how you reframe some things that you need to support the plan that you have in place. Love, saying and showing you love your kids can overcome almost any parenting mistakes you might make. Even when your kids have disobeyed, angered, frustrated, and rebelled against you, they must know that you love them and that you'll always love them. So this is something that, I don't want to get really in depth on Facebook Live, but, one of the things that's super important for us as parents is to know what baggage we ourselves come to parenting with. So, for those of us that have trauma in our backgrounds, or have a childhood where our parents divorced and there was fighting all the time, we come with some things from all of that, and sometimes subconsciously those things can seep into how we parent our own children. So it's really important to, again, like I mentioned before, always be evaluating yourself, because a really good parenting curriculum has that component to it, because being self-aware is what helps keep those kind of things in check. and not have those negative things from your past seep into that. So love sounds easy, but if love isn't something that came with you from your childhood, that might pose a problem. So those are things that you have to look at and then kind of figure out where to go from there. So all right, education. Make sure your kids get the best possible education for their future. This, of course, includes school, but it also includes the invaluable lessons about life that you provide during the time you spend together. And again, this is back to where everything is a teachable moment. There is so much to teach a child during the course of a day. Conversations are crucial. So, when things are not, in those power struggle type moments or preteen rebellion or whatever the case might be, it's really super important to always be talking to your kids, always about everything under the sun, because that's where they learn some of their most important lessons about life. Positive role models. Parents are their kids' first and most important role models. Be the kind of person you want them to become. So again, this goes back for young kids, something that we talked about. You can say things a million times, but if your behavior is demonstrating the opposite, your children are learning from what they're seeing and not necessarily what you're saying repeatedly. Because kids are smart enough to know that they're seeing a difference and something's amiss there. So we have to make sure that we're positive role models. And structure, and this is what we talked about in the very first session. Rules, boundaries, and limits. Without them, kids are forced to be adults before they are ready, and they lose respect for you and other adults. So, all kids would love to have ice cream and candy bars for dinner, but that doesn't mean that's what's going to happen. So, we have to know that we have to be the adult at all times, and that there's some room for negotiation depending on the age of kids. But for the most part, we really need to keep that routine and structure. And when your child asks you, well, why can't I eat ice cream and candy bars for dinner every night? It's okay to talk to them about that and tell them, give them on their level all of those answers that make sense, and that they'll be able to, to accept and then at least understand why. I'm the kind of person now as an adult that I might not agree with something, but if you can explain to me why it is, I can accept it. So, I think the same is true for kids. Hi, Joanne. So Joanne said that is exactly correct. Preparing our children for independence is key. That's what it's all about. That's what we're doing, is we are preparing our children up through 26, because again, that part of the brain isn't developed till they're 26, to operate in the world and to be successful. So they need skill to do that. We are really training our kids how to be adults, and that sounds kind of crazy, but it starts with little lessons as they're young. And again, I spoke last week about that 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. Those brains are, the amount of brain development that happens between birth and age 5 is crazy. And so there's a lot going on. And that's when we really start teaching those social emotional skills that they're going to need to build upon every year thereafter. So some of those things are things like I've mentioned: sharing, turn taking. Those are all, being empathetic. Another one, this is something that kind of blows people's mind. I used to ask this every time we used to do this in person. So I say to parents, if they have siblings, so if you have, 2 kids at home, and one of them has a toy, and the other one approaches and yanks it out of their hand and whacks them upside of the head, what's the first thing you do? First thing most parents do out of knee-jerk reaction is address the child that hit the other sibling. When actually, conscious discipline style, you should be addressing the child that got hit. Because one of the things that happens, a few things happen. When you address that child that did the hitting, it can reinforce that behavior. Because remember when I said negative attention is still attention? If that's the constant reinforcement that's being given, that if you do this thing, I'm going to address you. In the meantime, you've got a kid over there crying who really got hurt. And that should be the person that you go to. So in a classroom, it might look like this. That scenario plays out, and the teacher immediately goes to the child that was hit and empathizes with that child. That must have really hurt. How did that make you feel? Are you okay? In the when it's kind of interesting, because I had a couple of parents tell me one time they tried that at home, and the child who was the hitter looked totally lost. Like, excuse me, it was kind of like, I hit her. You should be talking to me. But so the teacher's spending a lot of time talking to that. And then the next thing that happens is the teacher is helping that child go to the child that did the hitting and say, I don't like it when you hit me. Please don't do that. That's where that whole language develops. And, again, independence. Now you're standing up for yourself. You're going to that other child and saying, please don't do that. And then repeatedly after that in our classrooms, you can hear little voices saying, don't do that. I don't like it when you do that to me, because that's the language that we're helping them. And there's something unique about that peer-to-peer interaction. And a lot of times, towards the middle of the year, you might hear a child in a classroom say to a child, you hurt her. Do you see her face? That's that whole self-awareness of emotions and empathy, and it's all kind of developing before your eyes. Those are the kinds of things that you can also do at home. All right, Amy said, yes, I tell my son all the time I'm trying to help him grow up to be a good man. That's exactly right, Amy. That's sometimes hard for kids to understand at that age, but they'll get it. And Amanda said, encourage the child that was hit or whatever the situation to use their words, express to other child, increase problem solving as well. Exactly, Amanda. And that's a process. So, if you're trying this at home, please keep in mind that, we talked about 3- and 4-year-olds having huge emotions in little bodies, not always understanding that what they're feeling is anger or sadness or whatever the case might be. That's the kind of language that we need to help them develop. And so, like Amanda said, you're helping children express their emotions or how they're feeling about something, and then increase their problem solving. So that's another, another way to look at it is that's something that's going on all the time, that whether you realize it or not, you're teaching. So look at it like this. You're teaching them something. So are you teaching them, I'm screaming at you because you hit, don't do that ever again, blah, 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 blah. Are you okay? Get up. Is that what we're teaching? Or are we teaching, that must have really hurt, you look upset, are you okay? Let's go over here and talk to so-and-so, and doing that repeatedly. So you're reinforcing one or the other, and you have to decide which one you want to reinforce. So typically people will pick the one where we're helping that problem solving and that communication continue to happen between the peer group, because again, not only are we preparing kids for life, but we're also trying to increase independence at every developmental level. So one of the things that's really hard sometimes, and trust me, I get it. When you have small kids and you're trying to get out of the house, you're just trying to get her done and get out of the house. So it's a lot faster to do it yourself. But at every given age, you really have to be looking at letting your child do what they can for themselves, because that's where that independence kind of grows. One of the things that really amazes me sometimes is You know, some of you may have had this happen when we teach kids how to put their own coats on. And we lay it down on the floor and they stick their arms up and they flip it over their head. And sometimes parents are like really amazed because they're just so used to putting their coats on for them. And in Head Start, we're teaching them how to get it on themselves. And then the next step, we're teaching them what? How to zip their own coat up. And that might be, okay, I'm going to start it. And then they have to. So those are the types of skills that, you know, for taking care of themselves physically. And then we're also teaching how to take care of themselves emotionally. All, you know, all different levels. Those are things that we're building on day by day. And those are things that at home you can take a look at around and say, all right, what is it that I'm doing for them that they could be doing for themselves to increase that independence? So anybody have anything else they want to throw out there? So again, those 8 rules, requirements that I gave you, those are something that structures that you can be putting in place at home. Again, looking at your own parenting baggage to see if anything is impacting on you delivering on those 8 things. Having that parenting plan, sit down this week and make that list of what it is that you want to see for your children when they are adults in the world. And like I said, you will find that most of the things that you list are things that require no formal education. The other thing that's really important to remember and hard to do is that always keep in mind that while you're providing all of these structures for your kids because we want them to be successful, we want them to, you know, have all of these things that we've listed on our list, is that our children are separate beings than us, so that they're going to make some decisions that you're going to say, that's not what I wanted for them. But guess what? That's when you have to really practice, you know, trusting that you've done a good job, trusting that you've put into place all those things that they needed, and that they're going to make the right decision for themselves. Okay, Amy has a question. How would you respond to a child that responds well to the traditional punishment versus positive reinforcement and discipline? Okay, so I think that is going to start with, I think that has something to do with the fact that it's become habit and expected behavior from the parent. So they're looking for that consistency and what they've come to rely on. Depending on the age of the child, I think you can have conversations with the kids. You know, family meetings is also something that are good once a week. If you sit down and you talk as a family about, you know, some of these things, you know, I don't really, you can say as a parent, and this is, you know, this is something I did not come from this, trust me, but you could say as a parent, meaning my family of origin, you know, I really don't like the way I handle that. And I really want to handle that a different way because I just feel that that's not the best way to handle it. So that would be kind of like admitting that you might have made a mistake or that you've learned something new. I've learned something new and I don't want to do it that way anymore because I think this way is better. So, you know, anytime you try to make change, I think that kids will push your buttons for a little while to see how serious you are about the change. So without knowing, you know, it's kind of hard to answer in depth here, but some things have to replace, and there's got to be some motivation for everybody to do it a different way. And those are definitely things that we're going to be talking about in weeks to come. How old is the child, Amy, that we're talking about here? And while you're answering that, this is why I wish you and Conscious Discipline had come into my life earlier. Listen, we're here now, though. That's all that matters. So, Rosie said, These also teach and reinforce the child with the skills we want them to learn, empathy and understanding about how to behave with others. Yep, behaviors can be talked about in a family meeting. Yep, and everyone's input makes us more aware. 7, okay. 7 is a great age because while it seems like you might be caught in this thing over here, a 7-year-old is a little bit different than a 3 and a 4-year-old because he has a little bit more understanding of a conversation. And 7 is a great age because he or she can be part of the solution to that. And again, family meetings is a great place to start. Conversations just with you and that particular child, and brainstorming about different ways to do that. And I really challenge people to make kids part of the solution because kids have more answers than you know. And when you really start having those conversations with 7-year-olds where you're saying, I don't really feel comfortable about this. Well, how does that make you feel when it goes down like that? You might be surprised because in some situations where they might seem vested in the consistency and the habit of it, they might say, well, I really don't like it. Well, then you're in a whole new place. And there's not one end-all conversation. This might take place over several conversations. And then from there, you can say, well, let's figure out what we can do differently. And the one thing we're going to start talking about next week is how to start replacing more positive to kind of get away from a lot of the negative stuff. And that's definitely also a way around that question. So, when change comes from you eventually, and it's consistent, then I think that kids get on board after a while. But the tricky part is making that change and having to be super consistent about it because, kids have to know that you're serious and you're sticking with it and the change is there and that kind of thing. And Amanda just said bucket fillers from positive behavior, which is so ironic because that's one of the things we're going to talk about next week. So make sure you come back because bucket fillers is something that we use in the classroom, and I'm going to show you how to use that at home. And the other thing about bucket fillers and positive stuff is that, and this is what I'm going to kind of leave you with tonight because we're already at that 30-minute, we're 40 minutes. Okay, so the thing about self-esteem is this. I was not a child who had high self-esteem just because of a whole lot of things. If somebody had told me 40 years ago that, one day you'll be doing lives on Facebook about parenting, I would have been like, yeah, no. People thought I had high self-esteem back then because I behaved in a certain way, let's just say, but I did not have high self-esteem and a lot of confidence in myself. But here's the thing about self-esteem. Kids who have high self-esteem and lower IQs can typically do better than kids with high IQs and low self-esteem. And we're going to talk a lot about that next week. Everything that we do parenting-wise should be self-esteem building and not self-esteem degrading. Because if anything, for my kids, even before, having a master's degree or a bachelor's or an associate's or whatever, because of where I came from, it was important to me that my kids had high self-esteem. And we're going to go over why that's important for kids next week and give some examples of all of that. Okay, Amanda, for example, Pom Pom once filled up a bucket can pick something reasonable. Yep, we're going to actually do a live bucket filling demonstration next week. So that's one of the things we'll talk about in regard to positive parenting, and talking about things like how to shift from no, don't stop to a different language. Because a lot of times, again, in day-to-day parenting, where we're just trying to get through a hectic day, a lot of us can fall into the habit of stop doing that. No, don't do that. Please, please stop. And so we need to shift somehow where it's more positive and cooperative and connected. And in connected families, people have responsibility within the family and to each other to make all of those things work. And so those are some of the things that we're going to be covering in future weeks. But hopefully this week you'll sit down and take some time to think about your plan and all of those characteristics that you're hoping to see in kids, because when you have that plan, you know, if you're, so for example, if one of the things on your list is for your child to be empathetic and compassionate, and as a parent, you're not showing empathy and compassion to your child, you're not going to end at your end result. So again, this is where it takes a lot of looking at ourselves to make sure that, you know, we're being empathetic and compassionate, what's holding us back from being that, those kind of things. And some of them are easy fixes and some of them require a little bit more work. But again, we're starting here with the final list, working our way back, putting ourselves in check along the way to make sure that all of those things, you know, are in place where they need to be for us, so that we can approach parenting and demonstrate those same characteristics that we want to see down here for our kids. This is valuable information. Thank you. Looking forward to the next session. Thank you, Joanne. Thank you for coming. So again, if you've been on, if you could just put a hi in the comments so we can take attendance. That's what I have for you tonight. Hopefully you'll be able to use some of this information. And again, next week, we're going to be doing self-esteem and some positive parenting techniques. So I hope that I see everybody next week.